Hello guys, this is Kurt, and welcome back to the Spectacular Spider-Man review. Last time we did story arc number 1, which was episodes 1 through 3, and today we're doing story arc number 2, which is episodes 4 through 6. Now, man, it's really hard figuring out the ways to begin these things, because I'm not really good at coming up with beginnings and ends to reviews, so I'm really way better at doing the middle parts of them. As we know in story arc 1, we see that he's struggling to be Peter, and he's trying to earn money for Aunt May, and he gets the job at the Daily Bugle at the end of episode 3. So now we begin with episode 4, and we're back to the big man storyline that got started at the beginning of the first story arc, where they kind of talked a little bit about that in episode number 1. So, as you can see, even though there's 8 story arcs, there is kind of an overarching story at the same time, because there's plot lines, little plot bits that get picked up as the series goes on. And it becomes very, very obvious, if you haven't figured it out already, once you get to this point in the series, that this big man isn't really like the big man from the comics. This big man is more like a huge, crime boss, kind of like the Kingpin. And he sends out Montana from the Enforcers at the beginning of this episode. He steals some tech, or was it Hammerhead that did it? It might have been both. Hammerhead gives Montana some tech, and Montana becomes Shocker. And this is actually kind of a bit of a difference from the comics, because Montana was not Shocker in the comics. Herman Schultz was Shocker. And so this is an example of a composite character where they combine 2 characters into one character. And I really don't have a problem with it. I think it worked fine. It's cool seeing, Shocker going around with this, Old West accent or whatever it is. Southern accent. And he, goes around. What does happen? I just got done watching this probably a half hour ago. The second story arc. Man, I'm really bad at remembering this, because the problem with this is, even though it is a really good episode, it's probably the least memorable of the 3 episodes of this story arc. He fights Spider-Man at a garbage dump, and Alex O'Hearn and Flint Marko are also there, and they all fight him, and Spider-Man actually loses the fight because he actually almost dies. He gets crushed in a trash compactor, but he manages to survive because he climbs into this refrigerator or something, really strong refrigerator, I think it was, and that protects him from getting crushed. And then he ends up smelling like garbage for the whole rest of the episode. It's like a running gag throughout the rest of the episode. And we get to see J. Jonah Jameson again, and he doesn't even realize that that Peter Parker is Peter Parker. Peter Parker walks in to get his check, and J. Jonah Jameson just thinks that he's the kid who bothered him a few days before that. He doesn't know that he is Peter Parker because, once again, he didn't know that Peter Parker was a kid or something like that. Kicks him out. And then Betty Brant points out that that might have actually been Peter Parker. So he's like, well, what are you waiting for? Go get him! Or something like that. So Peter Parker goes all the way back up to J. Jonah Jameson's office. He gets the check. And, I think that actually happened before the shock effect. Yeah, it did. Because the check actually got destroyed in the trash compactor. And then he had to get a new one. And luckily, Betty Brant, who worked at the Daily Bugle, did get him a new one. And somewhere along the line, we hear about how Peter has been doing very well, getting home on time and stuff, and he's been getting money for Aunt May very well. So she decides to put the old rules back, which is the if he gets home by 10 o'clock every night and calls if he can't get there in time, which was the rules that was established at the end of episode 1. Well, the problem is we never really saw any time where any rules after that even got established, or at least I don't recall that. Every single time I've watched that, either it's just not there or I've missed it and I'm stupid. But I don't think they ever really talked about it. So I actually heard they did have cut footage that they were actually going to release on DVDs, which they actually did with the first story arc that we talked about the other day. I recorded it the other day, but technically it's uploaded early yesterday morning. It was they released originally when story arc number 1 was released on DVD, they edited it so it was kind of like a mini movie. And I think they did add little bits of dialogue here and there to it. They were going to do that for all the story arcs, but then they stopped doing that. They changed their mind about it. And so now, and now they actually have a regular story arc 1 DVD, just to make it like consistent with the other ones. But yeah, I wonder if that might be one of the cut bits with that they never ever released, maybe with new rules that he gets established for the curfew. I don't know. That'd be interesting to see sometime, but I doubt we're ever going to see that released. And what happens is he gets the old rules restored, and then he finally defeats Shocker by like leading him to an old abandoned theater and like tricking him into like destroying old things so that it crumbles over him, knocks him out. And then Spider-Man takes the costume off him and has him arrested by the police. And then we get the next episode number 5. And the big man hires Norman Osborn to create some supervillains that can distract Spider-Man and possibly kill him, because the big man doesn't want Spider-Man finding his criminal operation. So Norman Osborn bails Flint Marko and Alex O'Hearn out of jail so he can turn them into supervillains with his Oscorp tech. And what's really weird here is at the beginning of episode 5, we actually see Alex O'Hearn and Flint Marko get arrested, even though Spider-Man left them tied up to get arrested near the end of the previous episode. So I don't know what happened there. Did they somehow get away? Did the webbing dissolve? Because it dissolves after an hour, which I'm not even sure even happens in this show, because I can't remember. I don't know. Another bit of a plot hole there, but I guess it's not that big of a plot hole. It's not a 100% perfect show by any means. Still my favorite version of Spider-Man, but it's just got some stuff that I think is kind of odd sometimes. And then, what happens next is he turns Flint Marko into Sandman, and we actually see Dr. Otto Octavius. I think we did see him briefly in the first episode of the series, but this is the first time we see Dr. Octopus with, like, his mechanical arms, even though they haven't been melded to his body yet, because, like, he hasn't become Doc Ock yet. And in this version, he's like this really timid scientist or whatever, and we'll actually get back to that when we actually get to the Dr. Octopus storyline, like the Dr. Octopus episode, which doesn't happen in this story arc at all, but it will happen at some other point in the series. So they initially intend, the experiment doesn't go 100% to plan, and Flint Marko turns into sand, but then it turns out that he's become Sandman from the experiment, so it kind of didn't go exactly the way they'd planned, but it worked anyway. And what happened next? So Sandman decides he wants to go, like, robbing some more banks and stuff. And they're like, hey, that's going to distract Spider-Man from finding the big man. So he goes and does that. Spider-Man encounters Sandman, tries to attack him, realizes that he can't. Sandman escapes. And there's actually a funny moment where Sandman realizes that his bag of money doesn't fit through the storm drain he's escaping in, because the bag of money doesn't turn into sand. It's really funny. And meanwhile, Peter Parker is deciding to try to join the football team because they have 2 open positions. So him and Harry Osborn both try out. And Peter does really good because of his powers. And one of Flash's friends named Kong tries to, like, trip Peter, but Peter senses it with his spider senses and jumps over his foot. And Kong's girlfriend, Glory Grant, gets really mad at him and says that she doesn't want him to be cheating and being mean to people all the time. And then Peter also decides not to go after Sandman so that he can keep doing these tryouts for football, which is another kind of selfish decision that he makes, because once again we're seeing the kind of immature Peter in this series. And also, this actually happened in the episode 4. I forgot to mention this. We also see that Eddie Brock is still kind of mad at Peter. He says he's going to get over it, but it's just taking him a while. And that will actually be an important part of the series, like Eddie Brock's inability to, like, let go of the past and everything. And then he eventually fights Sandman again. And he learns from Sandman about the big man, even though he doesn't know who the big man is yet. This is the first he hears about the big man. But Sandman won't tell him who the big man is. And Spider-Man, like, leads Sandman to a construction site. And Sandman is able to get, like, really, really big because there's, like, sand all over the construction site. So he can, like, use the sand to make himself bigger and stuff. But Spider-Man defeats him by, like, dumping cement all over him, which is really great. I think I actually saw this episode. This is one of the episodes I actually did see on Toon Disney when they did that. I think it was, because I remember seeing that part. And then he decides to deliberately do bad on his next football tryouts, that he doesn't make the team, so that Harry can get, like, the position on the team that he wants, because Peter figures that there's better things to do than be on the football team. So this is, like, a mature decision that Peter makes. Like, it's better for him to go out fighting crime with Spider-Man than to get the position he wants on the football team. And that was the end of the episode, I believe. I do think, yeah, Glory Grant breaks up with Kong because he keeps being mean to people. Like, he actually deliberately spills his drink all over Harry. And then we get the next episode. Peter's getting ready for the fall formal. He doesn't have a date, and he tries to invite Betty Brant from the Daily Bugle, like the secretary from the Daily Bugle, who's 4 years older than him. And this is actually, I don't know if I should mention Far From Home right now, because this actually reminds me of something from Far From Home. Betty Brant initially doesn't want to go with him because she's 4 years older than him. And as we see in the MCU, Betty Brant's around the same age as Peter Parker. Now, I thought it would have been interesting if in Far From Home, Betty Brant was one of the people who didn't get blipped, which was able to make her 5 years older than Peter. Because that would actually put the continuity, it would be closer to the continuity of Marvel, even though, and technically in the 616, actually, I think in the 616 universe, she's younger than Peter, but she dropped out of school for some reason, but I don't think you'd see that nowadays. But it'd probably be closer to what people would expect to happen, because Betty Brant is usually portrayed as older than Peter. And you can't, I have strong suspicions that the people working on the MCU movies didn't at least consider doing that at some point. It is just too obvious of an idea not for them not to have considered at one point. Why they didn't go with it, I don't know. But that's interesting. I went a bit off topic there, but let's go on. And then, what else happened? Oh yeah, the villain in this episode is the Rhino. So, now Norman Osborn and Dr. Otto Octavius give Alex O'Hearn his Rhino suit. So Alex O'Hearn is the Rhino. And he goes off to like fight Spider-Man and everything, to go off and look for him. He attacks the Daily Bugle and looks for Peter Parker there. And meanwhile, Aunt May is also there, like, talking to Betty Brant because she knows that Peter has invited her to the fall formal. And what happens? Rhino attacks. He goes to J. Jonah Jameson and asks, "Where's Peter Parker?" And we kind of, I don't know if this is a reference to the Sam Raimi movies, because I don't know if this ever happened in the comics or not. I can't really remember. But J. Jonah Jameson, like, covers for Peter, saying that he's never even met Peter, and his stuff is sent to him by email, so he's never even met him. Which is kind of similar to the scene in the first Raimi Spider-Man movie, where we get kind of the same exchange between J. Jonah Jameson and the Green Goblin in that movie. But in this one, it's between J. Jonah Jameson and the Rhino. And meanwhile, Peter witnesses it, changes into his Spider-Man costume, fights the Rhino, and he gets Rhino to charge toward a wall because he thinks maybe the wall will knock Rhino out, but instead Rhino just plows right through the wall, and he starts falling like, because it's a giant, because the Daily Bugle's like at the top of a building, so the Rhino starts like falling towards the ground, and Spider-Man isn't a murderer, so he tries to like web the Rhino to like save him, but the webs break. But Rhino survives the fall anyway because his armor is really tough, I guess. And then we actually see Captain Stacy for the first time, Gwen Stacy's father, even though we're not told that it's Captain Stacy yet. But we do see him like in the crowd with the police and everything. And then Spider-Man leads Rhino into an underground area because he discovers that the suit makes Rhino dehydrated really easily. So he leads Rhino to an underground area where Rhino, like, tries to attack Spider-Man and accidentally breaks, like, a bunch of air pipes that have hot air in them, which gets Rhino even more dehydrated. And then Spider-Man pulls apart some more pipes, and then Rhino passes out from being dehydrated, and then gets arrested. And then Spider-Man, right before Rhino, like, fully passes out, he, like, mumbles about how the big man is Mr. Lincoln. So Spider-Man goes to the Daily Bugle and talks to Foswell, who apparently knows a lot. Like, Foswell's a guy who works at the Daily Bugle, and he apparently knows a lot about, like, criminals in New York, criminal organizations, and asks him if he knows about a guy called Mr. Lincoln, who is also known as the big man. And so Foswell tells him about L. Thompson Lincoln, who a lot of people, there's, like, rumors that come around every year that he's this big criminal mastermind, and, but he doesn't believe that they're true. But Peter does believe it, so he dresses up as Spider-Man again, and then he, goes to see L. Thompson Lincoln, also known as Tombstone. So Tombstone was the big man, and not Kingpin. And the reason they did this is because they actually couldn't get the rights to Kingpin when they made this series. Like, they wanted to use Kingpin, but they couldn't get the rights to him because he's officially a Daredevil villain, which is stupid in my opinion. For me, he'll always be a Spider-Man villain. I associate Kingpin more with Spider-Man than with Daredevil, honestly. But yeah, Tombstone is basically Kingpin in this series. Tombstone is Kingpin. I don't have too much of a problem with it. Like, I rather would have seen Kingpin. But since they weren't able to do it, I think they did a good job with what they were able to use in the series. And I actually do think he is a better criminal mastermind. Like, Tombstone or Big Man is a better Kingpin than the actual Kingpin was in Spider-Man the Animated Series, where they had Kingpin involved with like 99% of the villains in the animated series. It was pretty ridiculous. I know he is like one of the big criminal masterminds of Spider-Man lore, but give the villains some independence sometimes. My goodness. So, I'm not going to be calling Tombstone Kingpin, obviously, because he's not Kingpin. I mean, that was the way he was used in the show, technically. But I'm just going to call him either Tombstone or Big Man whenever I'm talking about him. But he has the same role that Kingpin has in a lot of versions of Spider-Man. And, then he confronts the big man, and the big man offers him a deal. Like, Spider-Man can operate as a hero, but every once in a while, the big man will, like, hire him to, like, do something criminal, so that way Spider-Man can, like, make money or something. But Spider-Man rejects the offer, so the big man frames him for, like, attacking him, even though that didn't happen. And Spider-Man has the police after him for the very first time. And he says, I've never fled the police before, so it's like this big moment in the series. And meanwhile, Betty Brant decides not to go to the fall formal with him after the talk with Aunt May. So Peter has nobody to go with, so he feels he's gonna, like, lose the bet to Flash Thompson, because he bet Flash Thompson. Because Flash Thompson's like, I bet you won't bring a girl to the dance and everything. And he's like, I bet I will. And whoever loses the bet has to dress up as a cheerleader for Halloween. So then, but Aunt May has meanwhile been setting him up to go with a girl he hasn't met named Mary Jane Watson. And we know who that is, of course. Any Spider-Man fan knows who that is. She got mentioned, I think, at the beginning of this story arc, but we get to see her at the end of this story arc. Peter feels that she's not going to be great because Aunt May says she has a wonderful personality and everything. So he thinks it's not going to be very good. But he opens the door, and we get it happens exactly the same way that it did in the comics, where he opens the door, sees what she looks like, and she's like, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot." And that's the end of the episode and of the story arc. It's exactly like it was in the comics, and it's just great. And, do I say a lot? Yeah, I do. I know. It probably gets annoying after a while. Kind of thinking about it, I thought I would have more to say about this story arc than about the first one, but because I do think it was actually a more entertaining one than the first story arc, or maybe just as entertaining. But no, not really as much to say about this one for some reason. Yeah, I hope you guys aren't disappointed about that. There might be some stuff I'm missing here, but I don't know. I hope you'll stay tuned for the rest of the series and stuff. All you people who are following me in this series. And of course, I hope you also follow me, not just for the Spectacular Spider-Man 8 story arcs that I'm going to be reviewing, but also for the fanfic I'm going to be reviewing each story arc of after this. That kind of continues the series. I hope you'll follow me for that too. So until next time, this has been Kurt the Gamer.